would like to thank each and every one of you for coming tonight and making this evening a special night for Cheryl and for her book. And I'm going to call upon Nick Harris to come forward and to speak to us about this new book.
When I was 10 years old, I attended a primary school in Britain. We had a really tough guy as a master and kept us all in order. It was very strict. And I could read at the time. I read the Daily Mirror every day and the comics, and that was about it. But he gave us all a book to read in class, and I remember it so well because it started a lifelong love affair for me with books, with good writing, and that will never, ever end. The book was Pressed to John by the Canadian Governor-General, John Buchan. It was quite something. When my soldiering days were ended, I wanted to go into publishing, and I got very lucky and became a trainee with a trainee sales rep with Collins Publishers. I thought then I was joining a pretty terrific company, and I really do feel now that it was probably the finest publisher in the English language in the world at that time. I spent 24 years with them. For the last 12, I was based here in Toronto, and part of the time in New York and San Francisco. But I was the president and publisher, so I had the ultimate responsibility for the publishing program. So my imprimatur basically went out on every book that we did, and we published some very good books, and we were very, very successful. I had lots of other experience after that in publishing with Penguin Putnam in New York and McClellan and Stewart here and Grolier and things like that. So it's in my blood now. And I just want to hark back to manuscripts because a lot of authors think that if they write a manuscript, they'll send it to a publisher, and hey, the publisher will be so lucky to read it, and off we go. It doesn't really work like that. We had, in the 12 years I was there, we accepted manuscripts in Collins, and they were read and reported on. There was a report on every one. And we received about 1,000 manuscripts a year. And in the 12 years, shall we say, that I was there were 12,000 manuscripts came in. We actually published 3. 2 failed, and 1 was a bestseller. And that was really was it. You know, we all have our stories, but the ability to turn that into the written word so that people can read and enjoy is such a rare, rare thing. And that's what publishers are always looking for when they're looking for a book to publish. And that's why when people become bestsellers, they tend to stay as bestsellers because people know they are wonderful storytellers. And they just stay at the top all the time as long as they're alive and still writing. So I became actually a literary agent for a while, and I had to read manuscripts myself, and it was dreadful, quite frankly. And but the worst part of it was telling somebody who'd put their heart and soul and their evenings into writing a book and spending all this time. You know, I'd like to have been able to say, you know, you can't write, buzz off, but you know, I had to sort of try and bring them down gently. I don't think I was very good at it, and I began to hate it after a while, and so. When I had a heart problem, that was the end of that business. But I did vow at that time that I would never read another manuscript. I would have nothing to do with publishing, and I'm looking for new fields, and that was my vow. But but I think very highly of Canon Phil Bristow and his wife Cheryl, so that when she asked me if I would read her manuscript, I unwittingly said yes. When I got home, I thought, oh God, what have I done? So I put it in the front room, and it stayed there. And Jane said one day, she said, you know, you told Cheryl Bristow that you were going to read the manuscript. When are you going to do it? And I thought, well, yes, Jane, you're absolutely right. And that night I settled down at 8 o'clock in the evening to read this book by Cheryl. And I was worried. I dreaded it, quite frankly, and because I thought she was such a wonderful lady, and I didn't want her to say anything negative. And I read until about, I don't know, 1:30 in the morning when I couldn't see anymore. And I was enjoying this book so much. What a tale, what a storyteller. This was marvelous. And the next day I got up, I canceled everything I was going to do in the day, and I continued reading until I finished it. And I thought afterwards, if I were still a publisher, I would be signing Cheryl up for world rights if she joined the company I was running. And I would get onto my list around the world of publishers I would do deals with and warn them there was something magic happening in Canada, and this was it, Cheryl Bristow's book. And I really feel that Cheryl started in this way because it's incredibly tough. In fact, publishers now don't take manuscripts, and they say get an agent, and the agents don't take manuscripts, and so it's very, very difficult to start. And she started in this way, as many other authors have done and have been successful. And I'm hoping that I've given her a little bit of help, and that she will be able to find an agent who will find a trade publisher and take her book and her series out around the world. Because I believe that she will be, with the right publisher, the right team behind her, an international bestseller that we'll be terribly proud of. Her book is so very good. And I don't know what else I can say about this, except I envy you people who've got to read it yet, you know? It's a wonderful experience.
What do you say after that? Thank you, Nick. Okay, a word of explanation about my pen name. A-I-L-E-S, that's the French word for wings. E-T, French for and. It says pronounced A, and it means and. Racine, French word for roots. Okay? So the English word is roots, and this is all based on the thought that the greatest gifts we can give to our children are wings and roots, or roots and wings. So, L-A, Racine, means wings and roots. I've wanted to write a novel since I read Anne of Green Gables at a young age, and I had to curb this desire decades ago because I was busy raising a family, supporting the family, and working in the church. I thought then that there was no point in becoming a writer if you had nothing particularly useful to say to people. And I know that's not a deterrent to everybody, but it was, it was to me. And I'm glad now that I waited until I had a greater understanding of life and people. And as a Christian, I've met many people from this country and around the world who are soulmates. Quite often we have more in common as Christians trying to live under the leadership of our head, Jesus, than we do with our next-door neighbors. I have found that this is a ground I can stand on with Christians who come from different countries, different nationalities, different languages. We have a common bond that's really solid. And so we can enjoy each other. But often we're so busy, we don't have the time to actually do that. And I've often made the comment that when we all get to heaven, then we'll have a chance to catch up and get to know each other. Because right now we're so busy. But the people in the history of the Christian church are brothers and sisters too. And yet there's a huge gap between us and them in terms of time, space, culture, language, their experience of life, their understanding of Scripture, whether they even knew it. So they lived in vastly different times, and some of them went through terrible circumstances. So I wrote this book to help people in our generation understand a little better what it would have been like to live during the barbarian invasions, the destruction of Gaul, the sack of Rome, and the declining years of the Roman Empire. I knew very, very little. I'd forgotten everything I knew about Roman history, and so I had to build not just the story, but the mentality, the groundwork, the geography. There was so much, and if you read the book, you'll see how much work went into it. And so I also had to learn how to write a novel. And then there was the matter of trying to get to the places I wrote about. and had visited previously only in books or on Google Earth. I've checked out all kinds of books from libraries. I've ordered a lot of others. And if you go on Google Earth, you can go through the Roman passes. You can do so much on Google Earth. So I enjoyed that experience, but it was kind of nice being in the real thing too. And I can tell you all that without the internet, this book wouldn't have been possible. It couldn't have happened. I had help from one professor of antiquities in the United States who answered questions that were not in any of the books I had read. He sent me source material, and then he read the whole book through, and he loved it. He's recommending it to his colleagues over in Germany. So he lives on the border of Canada and has visited more of our country than I have. Someday I hope to present Tom Burns and his wife Carol with a bottle of wine named after the Ausonius family who are featured in this story. It's still being produced to this day. It's called Alson. It's $500 a bottle. Okay, a little historical background. At this period in time, the Roman Empire was ruled from both Constantinople and from Rome. It was divided into two sections, although it was still one empire. And it was ruled by two brothers, the Emperor Arcadius in the east and the Emperor Honorius out of Ravenna, which is on the Adriatic coast in northern Italy. They and their courtiers were suspicious of each other's aspirations. They were fairly possessive about the units in the Roman army. It was hard trying to rebuild the Roman army at this time, and there were constant threats. The Western Roman Empire had also been through very hard times with civil war and several invasions even before this story begins. Christianity had recently become the official state religion, but there were schisms between the Catholic Church and the Arians over the exact level of equality that Jesus had with the Father. Long before the days of Attila the Hun, small and large groups of Huns began pressing into Europe from the Russian steppes. And before they were defeated in a combined Roman and Gothic army in 451 AD, almost 50 years later from the story of the book, they had caused terrible devastation to the existing barbarian communities in northern Europe. They even got down into Judea and some parts of the Eastern Roman Empire. In 405 AD, a Gothic king led a huge assembly of Goths, Sueves, Marcomanni, Vandals, Alans, and other groups, and they forced their way across the Danube River. The Roman soldiers along the frontier were not able to hold them back. There were just too many of them. They came with their animals, their children, and they meant to stay. The king's name was Rodogast in German, which the Romans translated as Radagaisus. He was greatly feared, and he was an avowed enemy of Christians. He and his followers roamed fairly freely throughout the province of Italia for almost a year before the Romans were finally able to put together an army large enough to defeat them and force them into a corner. That's the story of the book I have written. It's also the story of two young people, both Christian, one a young barbarian girl named Theona, and the other a young Roman soldier, Marius Ausonius, who encounters her in the Italian Alps just before the impending clash between his small force of Roman soldiers and two streams of advancing barbarians. So now I'm calling upon Joanne Carlyle to come. She's going to read a little piece out of chapter 1.
A large brook trout swam over to lie below her in the shadows of the overhang. It turned to face upstream, waiting for whatever food might come floating on the current. Once she was satisfied the fish was intent on its own hunt, Theona slowly raised her net, flashed it down hard and fast, jerking the fish back in toward the bank. She had it. Jubilantly, she placed the brown trout on the grass near her. It flapped there desperately, its silver eyes staring at her. She quickly stunned it and settled back. Now she could choose to wait for the other fish to settle down, or she could move on to a different spot farther upstream. She knew several good places, but this one was close to the main path, and the summer afternoon was so peaceful. It was too much trouble to move on. Anyway, The fish she had caught was big enough to make a meal for all 4 of them. A gentle wind stirred the leafy canopy high above her. Fingers of flickering light illuminated a purple raspberry cane, a fallen pine cone, a tiny cluster of yellow flowers, and a spider's web glistening against the dark green leaves of wildflowers. Fiona stayed. Only her eyes moved. Within minutes, they began to close. She was roused by the sound of hooves pounding. There were horses coming along the path she had left, many horses from the sound of it, and all of them galloping fast toward her village. Fiona was alarmed. No one in her village owned a horse. They were few and far between in the thick forests of her land. She sat up, her thoughts racing, and placed the fish into the bucket. Could this be a raid from another village? Had the local pagan overlord decided to come to call? He'd tried twice before to conscript the men from her village and to seize some of the girls and children. Perhaps it was a group of enforcers from the distant Gothic warlord sent to punish them for their faith. Throwing the net and fish into her bucket, Fiona stood up and yodeled a high-pitched warning, then grabbed her bucket and ran back toward the main path. Branches snagged her long hair, scratched her face and neck. She scarcely noticed. Whoever they were, these horsemen were coming fast. By the time she reached the path, she was already too late. There was no way she would be able to outrun the horsemen. Instead, she needed to find a hiding place urgently. She saw 2 large intertwined fir trees a dozen feet ahead. She reached them and dropped down just as the horseman swept around a bend, galloped straight towards her. Fiona peeked through a gap and gasped. She'd never seen such men before in her life. They were hideous creatures, swarthy and muscular with narrow, misshapen heads, sloping black eyes, and dark scars carving their cheeks. Some of them were wearing rags and furs. Others wore clothing like hers. All of them were wearing several of the bright, jeweled brooches typical of those made and treasured by her people. Huns. She'd never seen a Hun before, but she recognized them from the vivid descriptions she had heard from visiting hunters and traders. These Huns were riding strange-looking, sway-backed horses with very long manes. They carried bows and arrows over their shoulders. Their intent seemed clear. They were going to attack her village. She crouched lower behind the trees until the last rider, a black-eyed youth, had passed by. As soon as he had, she stood up, her legs and hands shaking, and yodeled another frantic, high-pitched warning. Seconds later, an arrow passed close by her head. She squealed and ducked as the youth sneered at her and carried on. He was already preparing to launch another arrow in her direction. Fiona dropped to the ground again, trembling violently. The sound of the thudding hoofs died away. Fiona leapt to her feet and hurtled onto the path, running between the columns of trees, her bare feet nimbly avoiding sticks, stones, and animal droppings. She heard shouts of alarm from the village, and then a series of unnerving war cries. That's when the screams started. Wulfric, her mother, her students. The bucket with the trout in it was slowing her down. She abandoned it and ran faster.
Fleeing the area after the massacre in their village, Fiona and her father, a Christian missionary to the Goths, eventually come under the protection of a Gothic duke, whose town is also attacked. They hear about King Radagaisus and decide to join the invasion, looking for a safer place to live. When they arrive there, it isn't long before Fiona meets the king's little granddaughter and his handsome son, and her stories intrigue the little girl, while her coolness and beauty attract the child's uncle. After many months of marauding and dangerous adventures, they reconnect when Radagaisus' son rides with his men to rescue her from a scheming Roman deserter, and Prince Roderick begins to plan for a future with Fiona. His father's sudden arrival puts Fiona into harm's way once again. Nick?
Where is this girl now, Roderick? She's here, Father. It is she who nursed me late last night after my own injury. He tried to hold up his arm and winced. "Fetch her to us," said the king to some of his guards. "Let's see what my son's Christian bride-to-be has to say about all this. And since we cannot be sure she will be telling the truth on her own accord, we shall use a little persuasion on her to make sure." "No," shouted Roderick. "Torture." Fiona did not wait to hear more. She grabbed Roderick's jacket and the pouch of food that Ptolemy had prepared for her, and ran down the corridor away from the big room. She turned the first corner she came to and ran into a stream of warriors that were pushing their way into the house from a side entrance. Their top knots identified them as Swavies. After the first few pushed past her, there was a short gap, and then she met more and more of them, trapped. She squeezed into an alcove and waited for them all to pass. Among them she recognized two of the chieftains she had last seen at the Grand Council. These men must have arrived in town from the river route to the east. It was a diversion King Radagaius would need to attend to immediately, and Fiona was not going to hang around waiting for his men to find her. She pulled Roderick's jacket on, pushed her hair underneath it, and headed out to the side exit. From where she stood on the hilltop, she could see a long procession of wagons snaking into the town. At its head rode hundreds of Suevi warriors, just in time to join the Goths for the big push down the Isarco Valley towards Ponsdruzi. While she hesitated, wondering what to do, she saw a home on the opposite side of the hillside go up in flames. Soon after, two others near the road were set on fire amid loud cheers and shouts from the mob entering the town. More and more flames erupted as this new crowd, their wagons already chock full of stolen treasure, vented their excitement on the homes and shops and churches of the area. Yeah, so much for the deal that the Racines deserters had made with the Grand Council on the Danube, she thought. The treaty was broken beyond repair. She headed down the hill to join the newcomers. She needed to blend with them for a short time. She knew now where she was going to and what she was going to do. Ptolemy arrived at the door just in time to see her disappear down the hill and into the crowd. During the next hours, caravans continued to push into the town, and the streets filled up with wagons. Anarchy reigned. Homes were plundered and burned. Unlucky citizens found hiding were murdered. Even the hillside and country roads began to attract the attention of the men, women, boys and girls looking for treasure, food, excitement, and trouble. It took hours for the situation to stabilize and the barbarian leaders to agree on their plan of action. By early afternoon, however, they were ready. With King Radagaius and his two sons in the lead, thousands of Goth, Suevi, and Vandal warriors swept down the valley towards Ponsdruzi. Energized by the thought of battle and glory, they reached Thermopylae and found it abandoned. Excitedly, they explored the area, laughing at the futile preparations left behind by the Mosella cohort. Not much was left of the preparations for the ambush, just piles of rocks and a few hillside platforms. A short time later, they erupted into Ponsdruzi. It too was deserted. The Roman troops had been sent to the area were gone, leaving no protection for the people of the region or their homes and monuments. Farmers and shopkeepers who had not already left now fled for their ancient hideouts in the hills. Even the Ponsdruzi farmer soldiers were not there to welcome them. Their representatives had all been killed at the big house up the valley. The rest had gone into hiding. Not one of the Roman guides who had been assigned to the Suevi caravans had survived the journey, and the outraged fury of Bullius and the local Racine garrison had brought bloodshed on their own heads. Nothing now stood in the way of the invaders. The king of the Goths and his allies stormed down the valley towards Trento and Verona. The door was now wide open to the rich cities and countrysides of the heartland of the Western Roman Empire.
historically, this was the start of a very terrible time in the country of Italy, and it didn't get sorted out for a very long time. And the book covers up to the time when Radagaisus himself is killed, and Theona ends up as a captive of the Romans. But what I'm trying to do is show the hand of God, even in these terrible situations that she went through, because she did trust God, and she still had to live through some very tough times. So that's all I need to say. If you are interested, there will be copies available. And again, thank you everybody for coming. I'm so grateful to see so many of you here. I'm just really thrilled. I love you all.